This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated. Jihadist Psychopath by Dr. Jamie Glazov. I will tell you as an expert on Sharia, as a former child bride who has suffered and faced my own jihadi psychopath. I want you to go and order this book on Amazon.com or go to jamieglazov.com. Get a copy for yourself. You know why? Because you need to be equipped with the knowledge to fight our enemy so you can save your daughters and your granddaughters from future of Islam.
Good evening. Welcome to the Jamie Glazov Moment. Tonight, New Zealand massacre and leftist hate. The question this evening, where's the progressives' sophisticated talk about the quote-unquote blowback, about unemployment, about mental illness, about climate change? My friends, tonight I want to talk about the horrific massacre of 49 Muslims in the 2 New Zealand mosques that just happened by that monster and that lowlife, Brenton Tarrant, who, as we know, targeted 2 mosques in the New Zealand city of Christchurch. And it's an awful thing, horrific thing, monstrous thing. It's difficult to know where to begin here because we have to, when I say we, those of us who are truth tellers about Islam, always have to begin even a little bit, unfortunately, on a defensive because of the left and its propaganda constantly that somehow the truth tellers about Islam are somehow happy about this, or somehow how truth-telling about Islam somehow inspires monstrosities like this. This is all vicious propaganda and simply not true. And so this evening, I guess I have to say it several times, even though a few times it's very important to say, but we have to keep repeating it because we want to also get the truth out there. So even to begin with, because of all this propaganda by CARE and the SPLC and all these awful hate groups and leftist Islamic supremacist hate groups, we have to counter their propaganda. So to begin with, it is a given that the Glazov Gang, and that I can speak on behalf of all the leaders of the counter-jihad movement, the credible leaders, the wonderful leaders, like Brigitte Gabriel or Robert Spencer, Pamela Geller, or Nani Darwish, David Horowitz, all of us that are for civil rights, for human rights, that are opposed to Sharia and jihad. Of course, we are against the taking of human life, wherever it happens. Of course, we are opposed to this awful and horrific thing that this lowlife perpetrated in Christchurch. It's a terrible thing, and we denounce it, and we wash our hands of anybody that ever wants to engage in violence against innocent people, be they Muslim or non-Muslim people. Now, if the American military or some military wants to go take on ISIS, that's another matter. But we are against any kind of taking of innocent life. And again, in this case, this is a monstrous thing that we denounce. Now, what I want to talk about tonight is, yes, this is awful, very awful. But let's have a conversation about this in terms of how propaganda works, in terms of what the left is about, in terms of what the Islamic supremacists are up to. Almost on the same day as the New Zealand bloodbath, jihadists entered a church in the Philippines and massacred 20 Christians. Almost on the same day. But it's interesting that what happened in New Zealand all over CNN, MSNBC, New York Times, Washington Post, and it should be. It's an awful thing, right? Well, how come a lot of you that are watching today don't even know about the jihadists that perpetrated the massacre in the Philippines in a church that day? Why? Why did CNN and MSNBC not cover that? That same week that awful thing happened in Christchurch in New Zealand, jihadists in Nigeria, in just 1 week, slaughtered at least 85 Christians that we even know about. They slaughtered them in Nigeria, the Christians in Nigeria. They slaughtered these Christians in Nigeria because these Christians were Christian. Now, that genocide that's being perpetrated against Christians in Nigeria has been going on for quite some time now. I just want to ask, where is the same outrage? Where is the publicity? Where are the moral outcries for the Christian men, women, and children in Nigeria that we saw and we see about what happened in New Zealand? Why isn't there an equivalency in terms of moral indignation, especially on the left, especially coming from Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper and Don Lemon and all these characters that we know in the establishment media? Can you send us a link of just one show? I mean, just give us a heads up of one show Anderson Cooper has done on the jihad against Christians in Nigeria, and where he invited scholars to, and when I say scholars, I mean real scholars that tell the truth. Let's say to invite Robert Spencer, invite Steve Emerson, invite David Wood to discuss why Christians are being massacred by the jihadists in Nigeria. When has Don Lemon done a panel on that issue? Oh wait, I forgot. He can't get away from the Russian collusion issue and how evil Trump is. Sorry, I even apologize for having even dared mention that maybe we can pay a half an hour worth of attention to the Christians in Nigeria. But there's the Christians throughout the Middle East, throughout Africa, in Asia, where Christians are being persecuted, in Afghanistan, in Somalia, in Sudan, in Pakistan, in Eritrea, in Egypt, in Libya, in Iraq, in Yemen, and Iran. Throughout all of these regions and countries and areas, there is a genocide happening and being perpetrated against Christians. Look up the scholar Raymond Ibrahim. He does a lot of important work on this. Follow what Robert Spencer is doing at Jihad Watch. Where is the media on this? 12 French churches have recently been attacked in France and vandalized, just in 1 week. 12 churches in France. Have you heard about it on CNN? And even if they did mention it in passing, did they discuss exactly why and how? Jihadists have carried out more than 34,000, let me just say that again, 34,000 deadly terror attacks, jihadist attacks against Kafirs, unbelievers, since 9/11. 34,000. Where is the same coverage on these 34,000 deadly attacks that we just saw in terms of the left just manipulating and exploiting what happened in New Zealand, that terrible crime and that tragedy that we all denounce, but that the leftist media is using for its own purposes? Where have we seen all of that outcry about the 34,000 jihadist attacks since 9/11? Very little coverage, and zero coverage in terms of making a real threat assessment and for there to be an honest discussion. And it doesn't look like this is going to change very much, my friends, because of what we just saw that happened at Fox News, where our hero, Judge Jeanine, what an honorable, courageous, noble, wonderful woman, Judge Jeanine, that dared to ask a few questions about Ilhan Omar, about her potential commitment to Sharia law, and that maybe that has something to do with what Omar is up to in her anti-Semitism. Judge Jeanine was disciplined by Fox News, condemned by Fox News, and was suspended. So what hope is there in terms of what I was just discussing, that this situation will change? But we know something, that there is a reluctance to talk about jihadist attacks. But I will say, I want to spend the time today, because I've been reflecting on this very much, because my heart and my soul is dedicated to the suffering of innocent people, to my effort to want to protect all people from violence and from totalitarianism, be they Muslim or non-Muslim, all innocent people that suffer under totalitarianism. And we see something very, very dishonest that the left is engaged in. And the leftists are having this huge meltdown about what happened in New Zealand. And as everybody should be having a quote-unquote meltdown when any innocent people are killed or massacred. But why I'm using sarcasm in this instance is, does the left really care about what happened to the Muslims in New Zealand? Because it's very interesting what they're doing, because even the propaganda that they're using in terms of this lowlife that perpetrated that massacre, I want to talk about this a little later in this particular video, about who this guy really is. Because the left is painting him as some kind of person that somehow got anything to do with the truth tellers about Islam and those honorable people amongst all of us that want to protect the world from Sharia and from jihad. The left is trying to paint him as someone that has something possibly to do with any of us, or with the conservative movement, or with Christians or anything like that. And it's absolutely untrue. The guy is a lowlife that, by the way, loved communist China and sees that as a great example to himself. I want to talk about that. So we're seeing a lot of propaganda here. And the left is pretending that it really cares about Muslim people. But I'm just curious, if the left cares so much about Muslim people, which they are pretending that they do at this moment in terms of what happened in Christchurch, where is the left's, where are these same people's outcry in terms of what's happening to Muslim women when it comes to honor killings in the Islamic world? Muslim women are constantly being killed in honor killings throughout the Islamic world. They're Muslim. Why don't we hear anything about them from the left? I thought the left really cares about Muslim people. How about what's happening to so many Muslim girls? Not just tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, into the millions of what's happening to Muslim girls in terms of female genital mutilation in Islam, because of what's taught in the Hadith and in other Islamic theology. If the left cares about Muslims so much, why doesn't it stand up for those girls? How about in the Shia-Sunni civil war that we see always going on, if we want to call it a civil war, or the conflict between Shias and Sunnis and the hate for each other that they have, and how they're constantly killing each other. Innocent Muslims are dying in that particular civil war within Islam. Where is the outcry? Where is the crying from the left? They never say a word. Why? Well, we know why. Because one of the reasons is, we know what their destructive agenda is. At least we know the Glazov Gang, and that's what we're trying to get out there. But because the left doesn't care about people, it has an agenda. And its agenda does not include any truth-telling about Islam and its teachings. And so, as I go further, I want us to think a little bit about, where is all the leftist philosophizing and all of its interpretations of when violence happens in terms of what just happened in New Zealand? I want you to also think about the way that the left tries to excuse jihadist attacks. You never see that coming from the truth tellers about Islam in terms of what happened in New Zealand. I want to talk about that. Because the truth tellers about Islam just come right out and condemn what happened there and say this is an awful person. But the left, whenever there's a jihadist attack, always has excuses for jihad. And that's a very, very important thing to discuss. Why does our culture allow this double standard? And why does our society allow this kind of hatred that I'm going to talk about right now? So let's begin with this. I've been thinking about 9/11 quite a bit while this has happened. And I've been thinking about everything that leftists said about 9/11 at that time, and that they continue saying till this day. I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. I remember when 9/11 happened, I was in and around a lot of leftist communities. And it was sort of like the Walking Dead that came alive at that time. Because a lot of leftists were very depressed after the fall of the Soviet Union. And I'll never forget it on a personal level. I was in academia, in and around the academic institutions. I was around many leftist environments, and I know leftists very well. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, the left was just depressed. And then after 9/11, I was thinking it was almost like in that movie Awakenings, when the people just came alive out of that catatonic slumber that they were in, or whatever that particular condition was in that movie. And of course, I have to defend myself now as with all the caricatures and propaganda in us. I'm not trying to minimize anything in terms of any of those particular disabilities or whatever might befall people in terms of those illnesses. But I'm simply making the point that there was an incredible awakening among leftists at that time after 9/11, a miraculous transformation that I noticed in a lot of my leftist friends at that time. Or I have some friends that are leftists, but I think a lot of them I could say acquaintances. But there was just this bright sparkle in their eye. You know, they had awoken from this incredible slumber at that time. I've never seen them so happy, so hopeful, full of ecstasy, and they were ready for another attempt at creating their glorious and revolutionary future. And September 11th, in many respects, gave them a personal vindication at that time. And I know that a lot of you watching this resonates with you, because man, leftists were excited at that time. What I'm bringing up right now is, you know where I'm going with this, because you don't see any kind of behavior like this from the truth tellers about Islam when it comes to New Zealand. But a lot of us are painted like that by CARE, by SPLC, you know, wonderful people like Robert Spencer, Pamela Geller, us at the Glazov Gang, Annie Cyrus, David Horowitz, Steve Emerson, Nani Darwish, all these wonderful people. The left paints all of us as though after New Zealand we have this private party, we're popping the champagne bottles, we hate Muslims so much, time to party after what happened at Christchurch. That's how we're painted by this vicious, vicious, fascist lying left. And you'll never see a video of that. You're never going to see that, because it will never happen. It did not happen, and it will never happen, because our movement, if you want to call it that wants to defend the West and people from Sharia law and from jihad, does not support, and it does not take happiness in the torture and suffering and death of any innocent people. I don't know how many times I can say that. But however, in the Palestinian death cult in East Jerusalem after 9/11, we know that there was that video, and we know what happened there in terms of the Palestinians dancing and giving out candies after what happened in 9/11. What does that mean? Why did that happen? And where was the outcry from the left to condemn that death cult and that celebration that the Palestinians engaged in? And even while I say this, I already know that there's this immediate need to try to defend that from the left. Oh, well, they're oppressed people, and the United States has caused them so much pain. You see where I'm going with this? So the left is always giving a context for when Americans are killed. But when something happens in New Zealand against Muslim people by the people that the left likes that this has happened, it never gives a context. You see where I'm going with this? This has to be talked about, and I don't see hardly anybody talking about this, especially in the establishment media. When the innocent people were jumping to their deaths from the Twin Towers, it evoked not 1 ounce of sympathy from the left. The left only saw poetic justice in airplanes plunging into American skyscrapers at that time that was packed with innocent people. I've written about this in United in Hate, my book, and also in my new book, Jihadist Psychopath. The jihadist terror gave a promise to leftists at that time that they could now again succeed in a project in which their communist experiment had failed. Because they want to obliterate the capitalist system, they want to obliterate the Judeo-Christian tradition, they want to obliterate Western civilization. And so they were depressed after the Soviet Union fell, but once 9/11 happened, they were re-energized again because they have a certain agenda. I want to talk about some of the things that leftists said at that time during 9/11. And I'm just wondering, why is the left not making those same arguments today in terms of what happened at Christchurch? I'm just curious. So at that time, and I'm sure a lot of you remember this, so many leftists after 9/11 in the media and also in my own personal life, we're talking about how the U.S. has brought this on itself. Remember all those arguments? The U.S. really had it coming to them, the Americans, after everything they did, this was the blowback, this was the blowback. Where is that leftist interpretation in terms of what this lowlife has done in Christ Church recently? Why don't we see the left talking about, oh, well, this is blowback, the Islamic world, they really had this coming to them. Why doesn't the left argue that? I mean, it's always giving these philosophical, sociological explanations about, so when jihadists strike, we always have to understand the jihadists. But for leftists, if Muslims are killed by a person that they want to paint as some kind of, right-wing Christian white supremacist, quote unquote, for some reason they don't get into his pain or her pain or how the Islamic world had it coming to them. And again, I'm stressing, I can just imagine how the SPLC or CARE would try to take snippets of something I'm saying here, as if I'm saying it, And by the way, SPLC and CARE, keep at it, because we've got a big surprise for you coming. Keep trying to caricature us and slander us and libel us, because we've been talking about how much we love all Muslim people for years, and you keep painting us as anti-Muslim. Believe me, we've got legal people. We've got things cooking up for you. So keep at it, because it's a monstrous lie, and we've got so much evidence of our show and everything that we do day in and day out of loving Muslim people and supporting Muslim women and children and Muslim girls and how they suffer under Islamic law. Keep painting us as anti-Muslim. The Glazov Gang is not going to take all your lies laying down. I just will bring that up for now. So where is all that interpretation now by the left in terms of 9/11? And so at that time, I remember so many leftists at that time were talking about the hijackers of 9/11. But why were they so angry? They were very angry to do this. What triggered their anger? We have to understand where Muhammad Atta's anger came from. Where is that same argument from the left about understanding this lowlife's anger? Why aren't they, talking about, well, we have to understand why this guy was so angry? Why this double standard? And it shows that it's not really about innocent people, right? It shows that there's a certain agenda. Because when Americans die, it's good. When there's an adversary culture and the innocent people die in that adversary culture by somebody that's allegedly perpetrating it, allegedly from, let's say, the Western side, which in this case is not true, but that's how they're trying to paint this, somehow it's okay. I'll never forget this one particular leftist on this particular show I was on back in the day in Canada. And we were talking about 9/11. And he was talking about all the innocent people dying from capitalism throughout the world and from American imperialism and all the suffering innocents dying from even poverty because of capitalism and because of American imperialism. And I remember he said the Americans who died on 9/11 weren't the only people who died on that day. Where are the leftists today that would argue that not all the Muslims that died in those two mosques were the only people that died in that day, and we need to worry about the other people that died in the world on that day? Anybody that would make an argument like that would have to be sick. And can you imagine if somebody made an argument like that today? And yes, they should be condemned, and they would lose their career, and they would be demonized for saying such an awful thing. But it is not said. It's not said by anybody on the side of the truth tellers about Islam, because all of them, unless there's some degenerate somewhere that we don't know about, but the people in our movement would never say anything like that. But hypothetically, if a person did say something like that, yes, they should be condemned. But why is it okay for leftists to say that the Americans who died on 9/11 weren't the only ones who died on that day? And why are those people still working? And why do so many leftists nod? Well, it's because it's okay when it's Americans that die. And that says something. So on 9/11, the leftists were just so apologetic In the West, for instance, American leftists were just apologizing for the evil of their own government because it was America that brought this on. I've documented this in my book, United in Hate. The left was characterizing 9/11 as karmic justice. From Noam Chomsky to Norman Mailer, from Eric Foner to Susan Sontag, the left used 9/11 to castigate America and even the innocent people who died on that day. And it was all painted as some kind of, the victims were painted as collateral victims, collateral damage because of what the evil American empire was doing. And so we know that in general, in the left's vision, when America bleeds, the victims are to blame, never the perpetrators. This is the paradigm of the left. It's always that the devil made them do it. This is the central tenet of the progressive faith. So when Americans are killed by jihadists, jihadists are not condemned. Americans made them do it. But again, I'm going to keep beating this point. Why doesn't the left use that same argument in terms of what this lowlife has done at Christ Church recently? Why don't they defend him in the same way and talk about karmic justice and this is collateral damage for what Islam has done? Again, nobody on our side in terms of the civil rights side would ever, in terms of the telling the truth. When I say our side, of course we have nothing to do with this guy. It's just incredible that I have to keep saying this over and over again. But I'm saying that no truth tellers about Islam would even say such an awful thing. But it's interesting that the left does not engage in the same arguments, right? I think I've made this point here, but obviously we begin to see that the left does not really care about Muslim people. Let's go back in time for a minute just to see how leftists celebrated 9/11. We remember the infamous Professor Ward Churchill from the University of Colorado, who excused 9/11 as a case of the chickens coming home to roost, calling its victims the quote-unquote little Eichmanns inhabiting the sterile sanctuary of the Twin Towers, end of quotes. So Ward Churchill represented very well how the left was blaming 9/11 on America and also demonizing the innocent people that died. History professor Gerald Horne of the University of North Carolina asserted that, quote, "The bill has come due. The time of easy credit is up. It is time to pay." Think about that. That's what the left was saying after 9/11 happened. Professor Eric Foner of Columbia University, the renowned Marxist historian, expressed his personal confusion about, quote, "Which is more frightening, the horror that engulfed New York City or the apocalyptic rhetoric emanating daily from the White House?" Just let this sink in, because we know the glee that's happening in terms of what happened at 9/11 and those innocent thousands of people that died in those buildings and in the other attack. Barbara Foley, a professor of English at Rutgers University, felt that 9/11 was a justified response to the quote-unquote fascism of U.S. foreign policy. Mark Lewis Taylor, a professor of theology and culture at Princeton Seminary, thought that the World Trade Center buildings were justifiable targets because they were, quote, "a symbol of today's wealth and trade." Why aren't the leftists making the similar arguments of what mosques represent today? Because, again, the truth tellers about Islam would never try to justify any of this. But it's very interesting that the left justifies 9/11, but doesn't engage in the same sociological, philosophical equivocation, obfuscation when it comes to what this lowlife did at Christ Church. Why? Well, it could have something to do that there's an agenda here and they don't really care about people. Robert Paul Churchill, a professor of philosophy at George Washington University, rationalized that 9/11 was justified. And he wrote, "What the terrorists despised and sought to defeat was our arrogance, our gluttonous way of life, our miserliness toward the poor and its starving, the expression of a soulless pop culture, and a domineering attitude that insists on having our own way no matter what the cost of others." No matter what the cost to others, end of quote. Very, very interesting. Very interesting. American novelist Norman Mailer stepped forward to state that the suicide hijackers were brilliant. In his view, the attack was completely understandable since, quote, everything wrong with America led to the point where the country built the tower, that Tower of Babel, which consequently had to be destroyed. It was brilliant. Where are the leftists today saying that the attack on in New Zealand recently was brilliant? Can you imagine somebody actually saying that? But why isn't the left saying that that was brilliant? It's brilliant when 9/11 is perpetrated, but it's not brilliant what this guy did in Christchurch. Why is that? Why is that? And again, for the millionth time, we don't think it's brilliant at the Glazov Gang. It's a horrific, awful attack what just happened in New Zealand. But it's very interesting that the left gets to say that 9/11 is brilliant because of what America represents, right? Oliver Stone affirmed that he saw 9/11 as a revolt, quote unquote, and he compared the ensuing Palestinian celebrations with those who had attended the French and Russian revolutions. While Susan Sontag held that the terrorist attack was the result of, quote, specific American alliances and actions. I think I've made my point. There's a long list here. If you want to see a longer list, you can go to United in Hate. I've written about it. But, you know, I also write about the German composer Karl-Heinz Stockhausen at that time. He described 9/11 as the great, quote, the greatest work of art for the whole cosmos. But it's okay to talk Americans jumping out of buildings to their death as a work of art. Dario Fo, the Italian Marxist who won the 1997 Nobel Prize for Literature, observed that the great Wall Street speculators, the great, and he meant the Wall Street, but then speculators wallow in an economy that every year kills tens of millions of people with poverty. So what is 20,000 dead in New York? As I said, we can go on and on about this, but what's the main point? That the left, during 9/11, joined in solidarity with the Palestinians who danced in the streets in East Jerusalem, celebrating 9/11. This was the Kodak moment for the left everywhere. And it says something about leftists. And the media never condemned, the establishment media, it never condemned the left for this, because the establishment media is the left. It never really condemned the Palestinians for dancing in the streets at that time. So I'm trying to draw a picture here of 9/11 and how the establishment media behaved and how the left behaved, and right now how it's pretending, how upset it is at this murderer at Christchurch. And real people like us at the Glazov Gang and the truth tellers about Islam and Jihad and Sharia genuinely condemn this lowlife who did that at Christchurch, because we're against the killing of all innocent people. But I'm showing how for the left, it's just all part of an agenda. They don't care about innocent people because they celebrated what happened in 9/11. Johar Tsarnaev, Boston Marathon jihad murderer. I don't know if you know this, but remember, he was glamorized by Rolling Stone. They put him on the front cover of their magazine, looking as glamorous as any rock star ever has. They gave him the rock star treatment at that time. And they were, even in the teaser, they were talking in the one sentence under the title, the teaser, they were talking about what a charming kid he was with a bright future. But, he was hiding pain. And then that article is just a very strange article, went into the pain he had. And the whole story was, this rock star on the front cover. Would Rolling Stone do that today for Brenton Tarrant and give him a complimentary photo and talk compassionately about his pain? Why would they do that for Johar Tsarnaev, but not for this lowlife? Well, because it's great when Americans die, you see. And we believe at the Glazov Gang, and I know that all the people that we work with and are in this movement, our movement to defend our civilization from Islam and from Sharia law and from jihad, we denounce evil and murder of innocent people across the board. We don't have these double standards. When there's a lowlife that kills innocent people, we condemn him or them. And if it's somebody that does it at Christ Church against innocent Muslim people, that's awful. If it's hijackers that kill innocent Americans, that's awful. Now, who is this lowlife and what he did at Christ Church? Who really is he? Well, let me see. In his manifesto, he praised communist China. He calls himself an eco-fascist. He planned out and carried out the attack in part, he says himself, to save the environment. Doesn't sound like a right-winger to me. He states that he places the blame on capitalists. And the blame for what's the awful things in the world, according to him, he blames capitalists. Doesn't sound like a right-winger to me. He makes it plain that he does not support President Trump. He asks and refuses to actually answer whether he is a Christian, saying he doesn't know. Well, here's a heads up. If a person says they don't know that they're a Christian or not, they're not a Christian. And by the way, the New Testament Christianity would completely condemn everything he did, and you could never find a New Testament verse that would sanction anything that he did. That's just for all those people out there that try to make moral equivalizations between Islam and Judaism and Christianity. So this guy, this lowlife, this murderer who we condemn, is nothing to do with conservatism. His ideas and goals are those of the left, but that's not the way that the media paints it. What's our conclusion after all of this? That the left is a malicious and evil movement full of hypocrisy and hatred. Look at how they're painting this lowlife as if he has something to do with the truth tellers about Islam, and that somehow he was motivated by Islamophobes or by conservatism. And this is just all a lie. The guy's a leftist. And so everything that the left is doing here, in the context of everything that it did during 9/11, everything it's not doing during the suffering, let's say, of Christians in Nigeria today, the suffering of Muslim people in Iran, for instance, it shows the left's hypocrisy. They don't care about people or about the truth. They just exploit and manipulate events and tragedies for their own destructive agendas. As I said at the beginning of this show, 34,000 deadly terror attacks against Kafirs since 9/11. Christians in Nigeria being slaughtered. Not a word from the left. Iranian women today, many of them Muslim, dying in the streets, being raped, massacred, mutilated, imprisoned, executed for not wearing the hijab and standing up for human rights. Where's the left? Nazrin Sotoudeh, Iranian lawyer, just received 38 years in prison, 148 lashes for standing up for human rights and for trying to stand up for women's rights not to wear hijab. Where's the left? Maideh Hojabri, 18-year-old Muslim girl in prison in Iran today, caught on social media for not wearing the hijab. Where's all the left's concerns about Muslim people that right now they're pretending that they're concerned in terms of what this Christ shooter has done? Trying to paint him as some kind of a right-winger inspired by Islamophobia, when in fact he's a leftist who emulates the ideology of communist China. We stand at the Glazov Gang for innocent people. We condemn this lowlife and what he did recently in Christ Church. We care about innocent people everywhere, and we want to unveil and call out the left for its malicious and evil double standards, evil hypocrisy, and to label the left for what it is, an evil movement. Thank you for joining the Jamie Glazov Moment this evening. Good night.